They wouldn't be making the comment if they really didn't want to engage you. They're trying to figure out a way to get in. They're trying to figure out a way, how do I start this discussion without it becoming too serious? And the answer is, you're going to make it real serious, but you're not going to be judgmental, and you're going to move it in a serious direction, and you're going to engage that person. Why? Because your default position is they've got a good heart. Your default position is they're not stupid. They're educable people, and they can understand your message of veganism. You just need to explain it. Rule number 4, don't get frustrated. This is sort of this is related to principle number 3, don't get frustrated. A lot of animal people say to me all the time, I get frustrated because I get asked the same question all the time. I mean, even when they're good questions. And I always respond by saying, yeah, I can identify with that. The number of times I get asked the question, because of what these large organizations are doing in promoting Happy Meat, and promoting welfare reform, and deluding the public into believing that welfare reform is meaningful in any significant way. I frequently get comments about, well, isn't animal welfare a good thing? Ought we not to reform animal exploitation? Given that people aren't going to give it up overnight, given that we're going to have it, shouldn't we reform it? Shouldn't we regulate it? And the answer is no, because first of all, if something is wrong, we ought not to. Again, it goes back to the if child molestation is wrong, even though it's ubiquitous, even though it's not going away overnight, even though it's pervasive in the society, that doesn't mean we should advocate for humane pedophilia. Just because rape is a regular occurrence, is a daily occurrence, happens to zillions of women every second, and to men, but it's to zillions of rape victims every second. That doesn't mean that, it's ubiquitous. It's not going away overnight. It ain't going away anytime soon. Probably never going away. That doesn't mean that we should advocate for humane rape. But I would say this. In addition to that argument, we can also make the argument that animal welfare reform doesn't do anything. All it does is make animal production more economically efficient for the most part. I mean, there are minor counterexamples of that. They are minor. They are few. For the most part, the reason why animal welfare reform ever gets implemented, enacted, adopted, is because it actually makes production more efficient. We're seeing this right now. We're seeing this right now with veal crates, gestation crates. There are alternatives to those things that actually increase production efficiency of animals and are therefore better for the bottom line of institutional users. So, don't get frustrated. People ask you the same question 8 million times. Let me say this. One way you can be a really ineffective educator is if somebody asks you a question and you make that person think that the question isn't a good question. Always engage the person you're talking to. Because that person is coming to you sincerely. The person who's asking you the question that you've been asked 43 million times before, that person wasn't part of those 43 million other discussions. And so this person is struggling, trying to understand an idea. And she asks you a question. And to the extent that you sort of sigh and convey to her that her question's a bad question, a dumb question, or whatever, you're not going to get that person. You're not going to get that person involved in the sort of intimacy you need. Education, really effective education, is a form of intimacy. And you're not going to achieve that level of intimacy if you convey to that person that her question or her concerns are things you've heard before or things that you don't really want to talk about, whatever. I've been asked probably, I mean conservatively, 10,000 times about animal welfare reform. Here, in Europe, it's a question I have been asked countless numbers of times. And every time I am asked it, I try my very hardest to convey to the person who asked me the question the level of enthusiasm and excitement that I would have if I were being asked the question for the very first time. Always, always, always be enthusiastic. Engage the person who's asking you the question. Never Never let that person feel that her question is a dumb question or one that you don't want to answer because you've answered it 53 million times before. Don't do that. If you want to achieve the level of intimacy you need to educate, every time you hear a question, it's the first time you've heard that question. Okay, final principle. 1, default position should be people have good hearts. They care about morality. Principle number 2, default position, people aren't stupid. Principle number 3, don't get defensive. Respond, don't react. I like that, actually. Respond, don't react. That's principle number 3. 4, don't get frustrated. Every time you're asked a question that you've been asked many times before, treat it as though you're hearing it for the first time. Engage the person you're talking to. Engage the person you're talking to. Make that person feel, and I don't care whether you're talking to a group of 300 or 500 people, make that person feel as though that person is the only person in the room, and you're totally into what that person is asking you. That's how you educate. The fifth principle, you need to learn some basics. One of the things I find very disconcerting is people in the animal movement, and I suspect this is true of other social movements, although I think it's particular. I mean, I am involved in other social movements, and I find it disconcerting the extent to which people who are relatively new to animal advocacy, start websites and blogs and whatnot, and many of them don't know what they're talking about. Now that's fine. I mean, it's the internet is, at least right now, still free, but and so people ought to express themselves however they want them to express themselves. But if you want to be effective educators, that's the big if, that's the conditional. If you want to be effective educators, then you really need to understand. You need to understand the basics. And I mean, if you're going to talk to people about animal rights theory, know some. I mean, the number of people, I've known a lot of people who own books. They own various books, whether they're written by me or Tom Reagan or Peter Singer or other people. They have books. They own the books. It's not clear they read them. As a matter of fact, it's somewhat clear they don't read them. I mean, the number of times that people have said to me when I said, well, but Peter Singer doesn't support animal rights. As a matter of fact, his moral position of utilitarianism, he's a consequentialist philosopher. He rejects the idea of moral rights. And people look at me and say, well, but wait a minute. Are you telling me that animal liberation did not promote animal rights? I said, no. If you read the book, he explicitly says that he does not embrace the notion or accept the notion of moral rights for animals. He's a utilitarian. They don't. It's part of what utilitarianism is the notion that you can't have rules that rule things out, because that's what rights do. Rights say there are certain things you can't do, and the utilitarian says you've got to be able to do everything if it'll maximize the good consequences. So if using one human or 10 humans to find a cure for cancer will find a cure for cancer, then to say that they have rights not to be used in that way would deprive us of the benefits of finding a cure for cancer by subjecting them to a very painful set of experiments and killing them. That's what utilitarianism is, right? So, but the number of people have said to me, I'm really surprised. You said earlier, did I hear you correctly in your lecture to say that Peter Singer does not support animal rights? And the answer is, yeah, read what he says. Read what he says. It's no secret right there in the book. So it's important to read things. It's important to learn. It's important to understand the basics. Before you owe that to if you're going to be an educator for animals, then as much as I respect the fact that many of you really feel passionately about it, and you have a great deal of emotion invested, and you really want to change the world, you can't change the world without changing the way people think, and you can't change the way people think without being able to address their concerns, show that their arguments are invalid or not sound. And in order to do that, you have to understand the basics. So read things, learn things. Learn about the ecological effects of animal agriculture. Learn about the health. So at least some of the, learn about it. So at least you can converse with people. So that when people say, oh, don't you need animal products for protein? Yet another thing we've all heard many, many times. But when you're talking about the moral issues, you have to understand a little bit about moral theory. One of the things I tried to do